Good morning, everybody. Hi, and welcome to this webinar. I'm very excited to be here, not least because it's National Scrutiny Week. Whoever thought such a thing would happen? How exciting. Before I start, I have to say how amazing, what an amazing job that Louise and the rest of the TPAS team have done putting this all together as a Scrutiny Geek. It's just been incredible just to see the amount of stuff that's been going on and how quickly it was all pulled together. So kudos to Louise and the team. I think one of the really interesting things about Scrutiny Week as well is that it's kind of pointed to how we're all kind of learning from each other across different sectors. So I come from a local government background, and actually this week's a really important one for us. Yesterday we were celebrating the 20th anniversary of local government scrutiny passing into law. I mean, obviously I don't have to mention that. I'm sure you've got it all in your diaries, but it just goes to show that, you know, it's just really nice that all of that kind of crossover happens. And the other kind of angle on that, I guess, is watching the brilliant Q&A with Clive Betts that launched National Scrutiny Week on Monday. And there's just really nice, all of the things that Clive was talking about that work for parliamentary scrutiny apply to tenant scrutiny, apply to local government scrutiny. So many brilliant opportunities for joint learning. And, you know, we're learning from tenant scrutiny as well. So that's great. Very briefly, a little bit about me. As I say, I come from a local government background. I was a scrutiny manager in local government for 10 years, working for a local council. The last 3 years I've been working freelance, so working with different councils, doing training, research and so on, and different projects like this one. So that's been really interesting. And I should also mention that I actually started out my career back in the mid-90s, yes, I know, hard to believe, as a tenant participation officer working for a council. So while we didn't have tenant scrutiny back then, it's kind of coming back full circle for me. So it's been great to do that as well. So today I'm here to talk about successful scrutiny for council tenants and to talk about the findings from the research that we've been doing over the last few months. I think the report itself will be available very shortly, so I don't think you'll have to hang on too long to see that. But this is very much a preview for you. I hope it will be useful, and as Helen mentioned, I'll be happy to take questions at the end. In the meantime, though, before we get starting, and I'm conscious it's you know, it's not always easy just to listen to one person talking for any period of time, and I think this will take about 45-50 minutes maybe. Just every now and again I'm just going to drop in for a question to ask you to answer in the chat, just so I know you're all out there and just to keep you engaged and so on. So let me start then with this question for you, if I can get this working. There we are. I would like you to let me know in the chat just before I get started, and to give me a sense of what's going to be helpful. And I'm very conscious there's going to be a very mixed group, possibly. I know some of you out there will be incredibly experienced, others less so. So it would just be helpful for me to know who's in there, who's out there. Just pop into the chat if you can. What will make this webinar useful for you? So if you could just pop that in, and then I can see then. There we are. Are we doing it right, and what can we do better? Yeah, I think that's going to fit quite well with what I'm going to talk about, hopefully. Updates on the latest best practice, yes, certainly fit with that. Options for speeding up scrutiny. Okay, I'm not 100% sure I'll cover that, but it certainly maybe will spark a couple of ideas, and I'll see if I can make reference to that as we go through. Anybody else just want to pop into the chat kind of what they might like to get out? What would make this webinar useful? Impact analysis for scrutiny. Choosing a suitable project. Okay. These are all these are all great hopes, and I'm kind of, it reminds me as well that throughout this whole week, I think there's been so many useful activities that cover all of these kind of questions, and it's been great to see TPAS and everybody sharing their experience and their ideas in these areas. Housing association tenant wants to hear about any differences in approach, so that's interesting as well, and I think that's really nice, because it comes back to this theme about everybody kind of learning from each other and across different sectors and different organisations. Okay, let's make a start then. So as I said, I'm going to talk about, I don't know, 45, 50 minutes, something like that, so hopefully it'll be helpful. Okay, so the research. So I was really excited to be asked to be involved with this research, and the idea behind it, I think, really is that there's quite a lot of activity that's been done around scrutiny in housing associations, but maybe less so in terms of what's going on in local authorities, in councils. So I think it was partly to kind of fill that gap, but also partly to provide a bit of support and encouragement and sort of good practice tips for those in councils doing council tenant scrutiny. Either they've been doing it for a while, or maybe they're just getting started, and just to shine a real spotlight on that particular area. In doing that, we thought it would be really good to take the approach of sharing successes. So we really wanted to shine a light on what was working well and to learn from that, rather than necessarily focusing on problems so much. We wanted to highlight the benefits of tenant scrutiny, and that's for both landlords and tenants. So really just showing, what difference it could make. To highlight what helps to make council tenant scrutiny successful, so give some ideas and some inspiration for practical things that people might do. And linked to that, I think it's really helpful to hear advice from tenants, councillors, officers and national experts. So when you see the report, you'll see that there's a lot of quotes in there from individuals, and I have to say, I really enjoyed speaking to everybody. So I think there was 19 phone interviews that I did, and everybody was full of sort of brilliant sort of ideas and inspiration. So we tried to capture as much of that as possible in the report, and it's straight from the horse's mouth, so to speak. So you can hear the actual quotes from people directly when you see the report. Okay, so I'm really keen on any piece of work that I do being as useful as possible for the people that are reading it. I've always worried about reports just going onto the shelf, so I wanted to make it useful. So I've thought about how it might be helpful to make the case for tenant scrutiny if you're in a council where it hasn't started, so highlighting the benefits. Lots of very practical, specific things in there, so that will help suggestions for new things you might try. That might also spark inspiration for new ways of doing things. So I'm a big believer that in thinking about, when you see ideas about what other people are doing, that thing might not be exactly right for where you are, but it might just give you an idea. I mean, you'll be the expert in what works for you. So it's always there to just spark something else off that you might want to try. And I think, as somebody already said in the chat, the report should give you added confidence for the things you're already doing. So I know a lot of people are doing some brilliant work in council tenant scrutiny already, and this is just to hopefully it'll be useful for them just to see, oh yeah, no, we're covering that and we're covering that. So what's in the report? Well, I love making lists. This is one of my things I like doing. So it's kind of a lot of lists, really. It highlights 4 specific success stories. So there's 4 case studies that I built the report around. And again, thank you so much to the 4, and I'll mention who they are in a moment, for giving up their time and sharing what they do. It's been brilliant to hear from them all. 5 big benefits. So as I said, if you're making the case, just to be able to highlight what those benefits of council tenant scrutiny are. 10 keys to success. So what are the 10 factors that we think from the research, from the case studies, are going to help to make council tenant scrutiny successful? And as I said, plenty of tips and advice, direct quotes from people in the know. Just quickly, TPAS described tenant scrutiny, a process for carrying out resident-led reviews on all areas of an organisation business. I think it's just worth mentioning at the start as well, it is stated in housing regulation, so it is, it's required. But as I say, we've taken very much the approach in the report to show, even though it's required, we still think it's a really helpful and important thing to do in any case. But that just kind of underpins it, if you like. One of the things, as I said, we just wanted to highlight at the start as well, that many organisations, many councils, and this is a quote from a report that TPAS did with the Local Government Association, there are councils with resident-led scrutiny frameworks in place, but there are many that don't have it, and they're kind of pointing to the fact that that's a requirement of the standards. So there's definitely a gap there that needs to be filled, and that just kind of reinforced kind of the idea of the research in the first place. I think when thinking about this report, I guess I'd say that probably 80–90% of what you do in scrutiny in councils is the same as in housing associations. I want to say that the report is helpful because all of the stuff that's in the report comes from a council housing context. So you can be reassured that it comes from that and it's in that context, and you know that it all works in that context. But it's also important to just notice what the differences are to housing association scrutiny. So there are still one or two important differences. Size. So typically local councils are bigger than housing associations, and along with that, it means that they're more complex. So they have a lot of different functions, and that means that in tenant scrutiny, you're dealing potentially with lots of different departments instead of just one organisation, whether it's environment or social services. Housing might be one department, or it might be split between different things. So you find that you're dealing with different people, and that size can make it more complicated. Decision making is different. In a housing association, you typically have a board. You might find that there's tenant representative on that, and it's maybe a scrutiny panel that sits underneath that board. Within a council, decision making structures are much bigger and much more distant. So you might have a cabinet with, say, 10 cabinet members making decisions, and scrutiny councillors kind of providing the balance to that. Typically, tenant scrutiny will be one step removed from that, so it's not as easy to feed in. You've also got the point that there are councillors that make decisions in local government, and some of those might be involved in tenant scrutiny, and sometimes you need to make contact with them. They're there making decisions for the council, but they're also there representing their individual communities. So working with councillors, although housing association tenant scrutiny might do as well, is a particular aspect of what you do with councils that you wouldn't do with housing associations. And then finally, culture. Not always the case, but you might notice that because local government is bigger, because there are more laws and regulations, and because they don't change as much, you find housing associations often have mergers, and they'll be smaller and so on. They're a bit more, I don't know, you could call, they get the chance to kind of change and look at their culture more often, whereas local government councils tend to go on the same way. And all of that could have been an organisation for a long time, and all of that tends to feed into a culture which is a bit more cautious, a bit more risk averse, and less able sometimes to get to grips easily with new things like council tenant scrutiny, for example. So the culture can be different as well. Important differences, I think, as I said, but maybe overall the similarities outweigh the differences. So I said there were 4 success stories, so let's quickly talk about them, because I think that it was great to learn about all of them. And you can, I'm going to show each of them, and each of them have got information on their website. So if you want to learn out about each of them, please just go and research them. I'm sure they'll be happy to hear from you as well. The first case study was Hull City Council. They've got an independent tenant scrutiny panel set up following their compact of 2011. It was co-designed with Tenants. Over the last few years, successful scrutiny reports have included legal services, antisocial behaviour, street scene, caretaking services in multi-storey flats, and laundry services. And they were the first council to get TPAS accreditation. The second case then is the London Borough of Croydon. They've been going as a scrutiny panel for 15 years. It's a small group of volunteer residents who meet regularly to look at housing services in detail. Over time, there have been between 5 and 11 members, and the panel can include up to 15. They typically complete 2 or 3 reviews a year. Recent examples have included communications, repairs, neighbourhood wardens, and complaints. Overall, 90% of their recommendations get accepted, with reasons given for those that are not. Again, that's their web page if you want to go and have a look there. The third one is Northwest Leicestershire District Council. They've got an excellent track record of helping to shape and improve housing services, and actually 100% of recommendations they make have been approved by Cabinet and implemented by Housing. The panel, originally set up in 2012, completes 2 to 3 inspections of different services areas a year. Recently, they've looked at repairs, antisocial behaviour, estate management, and complaints. There are currently 5 members of the panel, although there have been up to 8. And then finally, the last success story is Swindon Borough Council. They're a group of trained volunteer council tenants that make up their panel, and they review the services delivered by Swindon Borough Council's housing departments. And as well as doing a number of reviews, Swindon's slightly different in that they meet regularly to do local area performance review meetings with heads of service, and they also act as the designated person for complaints. So that's a different function they have, but they fit it in very nicely with what they do in terms of scrutiny. And I think what we wanted to do with these 4 success stories, as you might have noticed, is to have a bit of a mix of different types of council and to cover different parts of the country. So between those 4, I think we did that really well. Okay, so I'm about to talk about the benefits of council tenant scrutiny. But before I do that, I wanted to say I think it's just helpful to take the odd break. And just ask you, what do you think are the benefits of council tenant scrutiny? Just in the chat, if you could just think for a few seconds, and then maybe give your own suggestions of what might be the benefits of council tenant scrutiny. As I said, you might be new to this and you're just kind of imagining what they might be, or if you're experienced, then what have been the benefits of council tenant scrutiny for you? Yeah, opportunity to improve services, widens democracy, improve reputation. Yeah, I think that's an important one. Critical friend, developing tenant relationships, develop resident skills, tenant ownership and empowerment, tailor services and make improvements, giving staff lived experience reports. Yeah, they're the ones receiving the service. To be a voice for those that can't. Yeah, tenant buy-in. Okay, so I think it's, as I said, I mean, it's there's clearly a lot of good knowledge and understanding in the room, and I think we've covered most of those things. But there's always, as always, there's 1 or 2 really good points there that perhaps you won't find in the report, which again really highlights the importance of the kind of constant learning and development and talking to other tenants in particular that are doing this. So what did I take from the research? So when we did the interviews, we took all the material and we pulled it all together. And from what I got from the interviews, these are the 5 benefits that particularly stood out from the research. And as I said, they won't necessarily cover everything, but I think they're a good starting point. So the first one was improved services for tenants. So whether that was in-depth pieces of work or regular performance conversations with housing managers, all of the cases were really, able to highlight differences that had been made, and that feeds in to tenant satisfaction. And I think, as people have pointed out in the chat, the fact that tenants have been involved in that, it really does, you know, those improvements are the things that are going to hit the right buttons and really, you know, make a higher satisfaction for tenants. So, for example, North West Leicestershire review of repairs led to a specialist repairs call centre being set up, with an increase in tenant satisfaction as a result. The second one then that we found from the research is better value for money. And actually, I think you find, you know, we're talking to all of the cases again, tenants pay the rent and they want housing department budgets to be spent as well as they can be. It's tenants' rent money. They want it to be used wisely, and that really does come through in all the work that Tenant Scrutiny does. And I think it's such an important one to underline, is that you know, as the rent payers, these tenants are in the best position to kind of hunt out those savings. So so one of the reviews that we came across was a review of caretaking that saved around £60,000. So that's, you know, that's the kind of examples that you can look for, and it's possible to actually highlight those financial savings in the work that's being done. The third benefit then, and I hope you like my picture here of two people doing, I don't know, a nice tango, I guess you might describe it as. And I think you hinted at this in the chat as well, stronger relationship between the council and tenants. And I don't just mean between the people doing tenant scrutiny and council officers, I mean generally between the council and tenants. People I spoke to talked about the fact that when tenants see that changes have been made as a result of conversations with other tenants, even if it's not them, people are more willing to engage with those services and feel better about those services and feel better about the landlord as well. So that idea of reputation, I think actually that was mentioned, fits into that very well. The fourth benefit then is enhanced information and communication. So tenants are the ones obviously receiving that information and communication. Tenants can be passing on information, and I know that's happened recently as a, you know, in the context of the pandemic. Tenant scrutineers have been, you know, quite important as a trusted source of information and communication as messages have gone out, but also tenants have been very important in scrutiny in feeding back to the landlord what's working, what's not. So, for example, Croydon did a review of communications across a range of methods that really did make a difference to the way that the landlord was communicating with tenants. And then finally, and this came through incredibly strongly as well, tenant scrutiny is a fantastic opportunity for tenants to develop. Through involvement in scrutiny, tenants get knowledge, skills, confidence. People really kind of talk about having gone on a journey with it and really kind of, you know, found it really personally useful. And I guess one of the really interesting things is employability as well. Certainly in Hull, for example, tenant scrutineers get references provided, and involvement has led to some people getting jobs with the housing department. So, you know, those are very specific ways that tenant scrutiny and involvement in tenant scrutiny can be helpful to people. And I think that's, you know, I don't think you should underestimate the importance of that. And as we mentioned later on in the research as well, I think it's always important to remember that tenant scrutineers are active volunteers, unpaid volunteers. So I think it's, you know, it's totally only right that people get something out of the experience as well. Okay, so I'm going to move on in a second to the 10, you know, success factors that we found from the case studies. But again, I'm curious to find what are the success factors that you know about. So here's a question for you in the chat again, and it would be helpful just to see your answers on this. What might help council tenant scrutiny to be successful? So what, in your view, might be the success factors that either that you've heard about, or your direct experience in tenant scrutiny from a housing association perspective or from a council perspective, just pop in the chat any ideas that you've got about what might help council tenant scrutiny to be successful. Buy-in from senior management, yeah, variety of communication channels, measurable outcomes, internal support and champions, and effective wider communication. It just needs to be meaningful and not just a tick box exercise. High level management support, being wide and diverse in the approach to scrutiny, buy-in from councillors. Staff colleague awareness of the process. Good. I'm feeling pleased looking at these comments because I think we've pretty much covered most of these in the research. So, as I said, not absolutely everything, and there's always something else to learn. I think evidence-based, transparency, focus and direction for the group, visible outcomes. Okay, so as I said, it's really great to have everybody involved in the webinar and lots of experience out there. And I notice also a couple of people that have been involved in the cases as well. So it's brilliant to have you involved, and a couple of names I recognise from the phone interviews. So hopefully I'm doing justice to the the great feedback and material that you gave me. Okay, so let me just talk through then the 10 keys to success. I bet nobody's ever used keys as a metaphor in a housing report before, have they? Nope, I think I'm the first. At the end as well, I will have a slide with just the 10 of them on by their own. So I think Helen mentioned that you'll get the slides at the end. So, but if you wanted to, take a quick picture or a screenshot of that, then when we get to that slide, you can do that. Okay, so what were the 10 things that we found? 10 keys to success. Okay, number one, and as we're doing today, and as we're sharing and learning, is learning and development. That really was highlighted in each of the cases. And I think the thing that really sticks out for me is the variety of ways in which people were doing their learning and development. Honestly, there's no single one way to do this, and everybody was finding different ways, whether it's general skills that they were looking at, like how to do a scrutiny review, whatever it might be, or formally training provided by the landlord, bringing in somebody independent like TPAS, formal learning, informal learning, doing it as part of induction for new panel members, project specific. So for example, hearing from an expert at the beginning of a review or an inquiry to give the panel the kind of specific knowledge that they need at the start, and peer learning, meeting other tenant scrutineers. I know Swindon very good at doing this, and meeting with other council tenant scrutineers and other authorities to share their experiences and their ideas. And I do, I think peer learning from other work that I've done and other research in different areas, people who are school governors, people who are councillors, always talk about some of their most valuable learning experiences being talking to others, doing a similar role, but in different organisations. So I can't stress strongly enough how important that was. And it was great to hear about Swindon's example, for example, as well. Another one that you might be aware of, but it was lovely to hear about Hull's 12-week housing academy. So if you don't know about that, they basically have a 10-week program where you go along to a series of short kind of presentations or training sessions with housing officers on different aspects. People involved in tenant participation and their learning and their knowledge. And one of the things I particularly love about that is that they go through that alongside housing officers, and that also helps to build kind of relationships, and that comes on. I'll mention that again in a moment. Okay, number two, it feels like reading the top 10 or something. Support and resources is really, really important when it comes to tenant scrutiny. Again, as I mentioned earlier, people involved in tenant scrutiny are active volunteers, they're unpaid, they're giving up their time, and it's so important, I think, to to recognise that, as well as to make the work possible for landlords to provide the support and things that they need. So whether it's things like laptops and broadband, costs and expenses, meeting arrangements, rooms, refreshments, that kind of stuff, or whether it's kind of officer support as well, which is very important. Maybe help with drafting reports and action plans. Obviously, the reports and action plans belong to the tenant panel, and they have to kind of make sure they're happy with them. But it's always helpful to have somebody providing support and drafting things. And link officers. So that's the idea that somebody either in the resident involvement team or in the housing department or wherever it might be is the kind of go-to person. So the scrutiny panel, if they've got a question or if they need help getting somebody to come speak to them, that they've got somebody that they can call on normally to provide that help and support. Couple of examples: Croydon Council loan laptops and pay for printing. In Hull, an officer works alongside the tenants and supports the review as their own project, working behind the scenes to promote the final report. Again, that kind of ties into the link officer idea, having somebody that works alongside, and it's a model that we're kind of familiar with in local government as well and can work quite well. Okay, number three, and it's been mentioned in the chat, and it's so important. Effective scrutiny, whether it's tenant scrutiny or anywhere else, depends on having a constructive professional relationship between the people doing the scrutiny and the people being scrutinized. So it was really interesting to hear from the different success stories, the 4 cases, about how important that was, and it always came up. And I've used the word on the slide here because it came up in a couple of the interviews, but I love the word rapport. People had kind of developed a kind of an understanding between each other and were able to get on with each other in the work that they were doing without becoming too friendly. And that's the kind of underlying the professional bit. You're there to do some work and to have a bit of distance, but also without becoming too impolite, if you like. It needs to be professional in that way too, to make things work. And it was just interesting to hear about what made that successful. So regular contact, I think informal and formal, came across a lot. People were talking to each other, not only in meetings, but outside of meetings as well. I love to hear about Swindon. Tenant scrutineers invite the cabinet members and other councillors to have a cup of tea with them. I think a cup of tea is a very powerful thing. Obviously, you need to do that virtually at the moment, but just having a behind the scenes conversation, just to kind of build those relationships as well. So that kind of regular contact is important. The second one then is appreciation. It's very important in the little things that you do as tenant scrutineers, but also what the organisation does, what councillors do, what housing officers do, in terms of being appreciative in the work that each other are doing. One of the great signs of appreciation, I think, is when a department actually asks tenant scrutiny to do a piece of work. I think that's one of the biggest compliments that you can get. In Northwest Leicestershire, I heard about how the cabinet and chief executive are always positive about the work that scrutiny is doing. And the chief executive takes time out to meet the tenants who are doing the work. So those are just things that you would notice to show you that there's appreciation. And then finally, showing respect. So I think this comes back to the idea that you take on board suggestions, that things are being acted on and recognised, even where things can't be done. There's respect for the work. People are obviously reading the reports and engaging with them, and so on. And we talk about in a council context, you would expect the officers and the councillors to be showing respect for the scrutiny process in the same way as they would for their own committee process, and that should be the level, really. Okay, so the fourth one then, and some of these overlap a little bit, but Organisational culture came through quite a lot, and by that I'm just talking about the day-to-day interactions between housing staff, councillors and tenants generally. The whole kind of set of interactions that go on within the housing service between landlord and tenants. A positive culture will be one where staff in particular are kind of open and flexible and honest and listening, and they regard tenants as an important asset for the development of the service more generally. So I'm conscious, obviously, that's not always the case, and we talked about the organisational culture of councils a bit earlier on. But there are things that you would notice and things that you can encourage which kind of support that. I should say as well that I think I found with all of the cases that there was a strong kind of history and background in terms of tenant engagement more generally, and that seems to be really helpful for tenant scrutiny to flourish. So when we're looking at encouraging a more supportive organisational culture, three things really. Number one is people saying that this is important and recognising it. So you would expect to see staff talking in their own meetings, in other settings, with tenants, wherever it might be, just kind of every now and again mentioning that actually tenant scrutiny is an important thing to do and that they value it, because it's important for people to hear these things and for these things to be talked about in a positive way, you know, in terms of what's going on in the organisation. Similarly, right, so that really just refers to the fact that you would expect to see positive messages in reports, newsletters, press releases, for example, so that if anybody coming from the outside was looking through the written materials of the organisation, they would get the sense that they are positive about tenant scrutiny. And then finally and as I think I've touched on this already, but I think one of the things that comes through very clearly from the case studies is that things happen as a result of tenant scrutiny. When officers take something away, they go away and they do it, and then they come back and it's been done. And that really is one of the most important things that kind of reinforces tenant scrutiny as well. In Croydon, for example, resident engagement officers regularly attend departmental management team meetings to talk about tenant engagement more widely. So they're working behind the scenes and giving those positive messages to encourage tenant scrutiny in the wider culture. And in Hull, tenant engagement is actively embedded in service development and planning. So it's really being fed in through that mechanism as well. Okay, so I reckon I'll probably talk about another 10 minutes, I think. So just let's go through the rest of these keys to success. So number 5, role and recognition. So as I mentioned, this is one of the ones where council tenant scrutiny is definitely different. You've got to find ways to connect with the cabinet, councillor scrutiny, senior management team, and the tenant engagement structures, the tenant engagement group that already exists. So I think what I did find from the cases was good examples of all of those connections, but I'm not sure anybody's quite got any one case has got all of those connections kind of fully sorted. So I think it's definitely interesting to think about those links, and I guess that's why I've put dotted arrows on my diagram there. Very interesting, I think, to sort of remember about the Hull using the compact as a process for kind of thinking about how tenant scrutiny fits in, and that seems like one very good way of doing it. Just a couple of examples then. Northwest Leicestershire, the panel reports to the main tenant engagement group after they report to cabinet, so there's a nice kind of flow of meetings there. In Swindon, tenant scrutiny reports go to a cabinet member advisory group, so they've got direct engagement with a cabinet member and cabinet through that way. And I really like in Hull as well, the People and Community Scrutiny Chair invites tenant scrutineers to come and engage and present reports at least quarterly. So they've got quite a nice connection between tenant scrutiny and councillor scrutiny. I think there's a bit of a, I think there's still a bit of a gap there, my feel is, and I think there's some really useful connections that can be made, both in terms of the work that's going on, but also as I said, learning from each other as well. Number 6 then is the scrutiny process, and I know from seeing the other things that TPAS are doing this week and more generally that this is something that I think generally people are pretty strong on, and I found some very good examples within the cases. And what we've done in the report really is just given some examples of what they're doing at these different stages. So hopefully this kind of diagram, planning, evidence gathering, deliberating, report writing, presenting and following up is useful just for people to think through how they work through the scrutiny process. Couple of examples in Croydon, the service manager gives a brief overview at the beginning of a scrutiny review or a deep dive, or whatever you want to call it. In Northwest Leicestershire, the panel holds interviews and reviews reports. In Croydon, evidence gathering includes mystery shopping and desktop research. I think one of the key things as well is in all the cases, the success depended on having a really strong process at the end. So officers being involved in designing the action plan at the end, and also a follow-up 6 months, a year later, where officers come back and talk about what the progress has been on the different actions. So I think that's really, I think that's an absolute key thing, and people talked about that at the start. Number 7, and you talked about this in the chat at the start. In fact, I think this exact phrase was used, so I was pleased to see that. Senior buy-in. In the picture you can see, well, it's not quite, I'm assuming it's a cup of tea. It's a paper cup, but hopefully it's a cup of tea. Just this idea that if council tenant scrutiny is going to be successful, the senior managers, the senior councillors need to be kind of really bought into it and tied into the process, and interested and involved in what's going on. It has to start, if you're going to have a supportive culture, then that has to start from the top, and it has to start with the example of the senior leaders within the organisation. So in Northwest Leicestershire, for example, the cabinet member is really kind of well regarded and attends meetings as a non-voting member to kind of provide support and kind of feedback and so on. So it's really, really evident that the cabinet member there is really strongly supportive of tenant scrutiny. And in Croydon, I heard about how cabinet members and managers take time to see scrutiny reports, and tenants know they find them useful. So just hearing that they've read the report and it was useful, and that feeling confident that they've done that, I think is a really good sign of senior buy-in. I know sometimes that doesn't always seem to be evident, and people will ask, well, where do you start? And for me, one of the good ways is just with that cup of tea. It's just, I know sort of the examples of, well, just invite them over for a friendly chat, invite them over for informally to see one of our meetings, just make some initial contact and just start informally, start small, but just start kind of building those bridges with people and see if you can take it from there. Okay, number 8, so nearly there. We've got 3 more of these to go. Access to information. I've mentioned it's important to have a link person to the organisation to help you get organisation that you need in order to plan your inquiries and so on, as well as the evidence as you go along and the performance information that you might be challenging from the department. I've found some nice examples, and I know it was mentioned in the chat earlier on. Certainly Croydon use Housemark star surveys to help decide what to look into. So when you're deciding about what to focus on as a scrutiny panel, actually the data that already exists, that the housing that the landlord has is a really good starting point. So Housemark data, key performance indicators, customer satisfaction data, as well as kind of feedback from cabinet member and director, are all used in Northwest Leicestershire, and very similar in the other cases as well. One particularly interesting thing in Swindon is I think they have an arrangement there where the tenants are actually kind of covered by the data protection legislation in a particular way, which gives them a bit of extra access into the data. So I thought that was quite a nice example and a good kind of piece of support for the tenants, and to sort of demonstrate how comfortable that the landlord is, that the tenants could use the data in order to help them to do as effective a job as possible. Maybe this is the one where there were perhaps the most kind of questions and challenges in the 4 kind of success stories. Some really good stuff going on, but I think people find recruitment and retaining still a bit of a challenge, whether that's bringing in new people, ensuring that the panel is more diverse, or finding people, you know, that are going to stay involved. Although, you know, I don't know if it's always so important if you've got a bit of a rollover of people just coming in for the topics that they're interested in. But I know people are keen to have people that are kind of a bit longer standing, and you do find that panels tend to rely on 1 or 2 kind of stalwarts who do an amazing job and keep going over a long period of time. And I think you know, it's so important to value those people. A couple of interesting examples that I heard about from the cases. I love that Croydon publicise tenant scrutiny vacancies, including through the council job pages, and I know they get a really good response through doing that. So maybe that's something that works a little bit differently with councils to housing associations. Maybe a bit of a wider access through the vacancy pages, but also treating you know, as a job. The whole kind of recruiting people onto the panel. I also like North West Leicestershire. Once the panel have decided who they want to be involved, they get that person to attend a few meetings and undergo training, and then the panel and the potential member decide if it's right for them. And I've seen that happen in other boards, in, you know, other parts of governance where people have done that. You have a kind of a probationary trial period, so both can just check if it's the right thing. So yeah, really important to think about, and a few ideas in the report for you. And then finally, number 10, and I think, you know, this for me is perhaps one of the most important things if you want to have good governance more generally, not, you know, not only scrutiny, but anybody involved in governance. Keeping in touch, in this case with tenants, and what they're, you know, what they're thinking, what they're feeling, what's going on, is so important. As tenant scrutiny is, you want to be providing your input from a tenant perspective, and to be able to back that up with the information that you've been sort of, you know, getting as you've been sort of going along is really important. I'm not talking about specific pieces of work where you're asking specific questions. I'm just talking about when you're just finding out from people, how are things? Is there anything we should know about? Just kind of being open, eyes open, ears open to kind of what things are going on. So some of the examples that I heard about through the success stories, in Hull, the resident involvement team supports engagement through Facebook Live, Twitter, other social media. So social media can be a key way of engaging people, particularly at the moment, as we all know, it's absolutely critical. North West Leicestershire have a virtual panel. I loved hearing about this. They just kind of have an email list of people that, I know it's about 20 people that have signed up. And if you want to find out how things are going, you just quickly zip out an email to them all and they just quickly reply. It's just a sort of a temperature check, if you like. Estate and street walks, scrutiny cafes is a Swindon example. Just having informal kind of cafe space to have a chat with people. Sitting in on tenant and resident meetings, just going along to other meetings and, you know, listening to what's going on. At the moment as well, voluntary and community groups, awful lot going on to do with the pandemic. Lots of examples of, you know, these are people that are in touch with people, you know, whether they're supporting people with their shopping or self-isolating or whatever it might be. So they're good people to talk to. And of course, these are the signals you get from this. They may lead to bigger pieces of work. They might not, but it's always a way for you to just get a sense of, you know, what might be going on, and just picking up things maybe before they become bigger things. I think it's absolutely so important that keeping in touch. Okay, so those are the 10 things from the 10 keys to success from the report. Lots more examples in the report itself, so I hope you find those useful. And I hope you find them useful as a set. So I was hoping one way you might use them is just, you know, if you were having a talk about either things that we might look at improving or whatever it might be, you could go through that list and think about, well, where are we doing well? Where perhaps are the gaps? What are the things we might kind of focus on a bit more? I do think the where we're doing well is so important. So I would always start by just celebrating where you're doing well, and using that list to do that. So if you wanted to quickly screenshot that or take a picture, then please do. And I can tell from the chat it's not absolutely covering everything. These are the things that we got from these particular success stories, but I also feel that most of the things are covered here. So hopefully from that point of view, it will be useful for you to use. Okay, so that's me. I'm done. I said I talked for about 50 minutes in the end, so not too far off. I hope it was helpful, and yeah, I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Dave. If anybody has got questions for Dave, if you can pop them in the chat and we'll pose those to them. I've noticed a couple as we were going through. Joan asked, how are tenants informed of the work of scrutiny teams, and are independent tenant advisors available?
Sorry, what was the first? Sorry, I missed the first one then, Helen.
How are tenants informed of the work of scrutiny teams?
So I guess we're talking about here how tenants find out about what the scrutiny panels are doing within their organisations, and I think that's a good point. I did hear some of the examples in the cases where people will use, there'll be a strong connection between the work that tenant scrutiny are doing and what goes into tenant newsletters, for example. I think I remember as well that Hull, in their annual report, do like to have a kind of a mention of tenant scrutiny at the start of that as well. So I think the important point there is to just be having those conversations with the landlord to make sure that the visibility and the work of tenant scrutiny is being kind of demonstrated and shown through the normal ways that the landlord would communicate with tenants. I think people, I don't think people want information overload, so having it through those routes not only gets it to people, but also I think it shows is another way for the landlord to show kind of support and buy-in for what's going on in scrutiny. The independent tenant advisors I know less about, so I'm not absolutely 100% sure what that's referring to, so I'd defer to somebody else to answer that one. I don't know.
Hi, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Oh, hello, Joan.
Yeah, hi. As I said before, we're a housing association, and on each of our scrutinies, we have an independent advisor who comes in and advises at certain stages of the scrutiny process about ambiguities and things like that, and report writing. Then it keeps it completely transparent and doesn't put employees of housing associations or possibly councils in unenviable positions.
Yes, and that's something that I'm aware. I know what you're talking about now. Yeah, so I think that can be really helpful to do. More generally, if you're doing a particular review, I know that excuse me, in local authority tenant scrutiny, in council scrutiny, we'll often co-opt somebody onto a panel if we're doing a piece of work, whether it's somebody kind of independent coming in, or whether it's an academic. I think Clive Betts mentioned this on Monday, actually. There's a lot of academics out there that might, would be happy to do that for free and come and work alongside tenant scrutineers to do that. I know if you're looking for kind of an independent advisor, somebody with expertise to come and sit alongside the panel, I think TPAS are in a good position to kind of put you in touch with people or to advise who that person might be, because I know they have experience of that. But I think actually, yes, the more you can get other people in to individual pieces of work, or even onto the panel itself, that can bring added expertise, then that's helpful. The only thing I'd say from my other experience is that before you do that, it's always a good idea, I think, just to have a quick conversation about what it is you want that person to bring, and if you like, almost like a mini job description of what you would hope that that person would bring onto your panel before you actually go through the process of looking for somebody to join you, if you like. So yeah, in summary, it's a great idea. Talk to TPAS if it's somebody general that you want. If it's somebody specific, think about the topic that you're looking at and who might be able to help, who might have expertise, and particularly Google around, see if there's any academics and ask them. They might be very happy to do it for nothing if it kind of fits in with their own research.
Okay, that's great. Thanks, Dave. Alistair's asking, what is the best way to measure the success of your scrutiny processes to publicise this for transparency and encourage others?
So I think the important thing is, and I kind of mentioned a couple of examples, I think, when we were talking about the scrutiny process in the report, it's having an action plan stage to when you're talking to officers about the different things that you want to change and the things that it's practical to change, and then having a follow-up stage a bit later on, maybe 6 months, a year down the line. And one of the things you can do is actually ask about impact at that stage. So you can look at what actions have been completed, and kind of have a record of that from your follow-up 6-12 months later on, and those things can be more widely shared. Sorry, a bit of a frog in my throat at the moment. And the other thing you can do is just ask what difference it's made overall to the landlord. Maybe even to other tenants. If you're doing your keeping in touch, you can ask people about what it is that they've noticed that's different about the repair service, or is different about the response to antisocial behaviour, or whatever else it might be. And you can put all of that into a short report and share that with tenants, or you can put that into a little news item for the tenants newsletter. I think it's just about having those right questions at the end. So what difference did our report make? How many actions were completed? What changes have tenants noticed? And then having that conversation 6 months, a year down the line, I think is the best way to kind of have a sense of impact.
Okay, thank you. So I can't see any other questions in the chat. If anybody's got anything, if you want to quickly pop that in, and we'll see if we've got time for those. I just want to take this opportunity to thank Dave for his presentation today and for delivering the webinar. I'm sure you'll all agree it's been really interesting. And yeah, if anybody has got any questions that they think of after, if you just email them to TPAS and we will send them on to Dave, and we'll do our best to help those. Thanks for taking part today. We really hope you're enjoying Scrutiny Week. We've still got lots going on, so have a look on the website to see what's happening. And there's other things that you can book on. We've got more webinars, roundtables, things like that. So please do have a look at those. And yeah, thanks for everybody. We hope you stay safe, stay well, and we hope to see you soon when we get back to some kind of normal, whatever that might be. Thanks again to Dave, and take care.